The Electoral College. Before we can really talk about the Electoral College itself, we have to have a mindset of what the Founding Fathers saw. For instance, in the Federalist One, again, Hamilton said, reserved to the people of this country by their conduct and example to decide the important question whether societies of men are really capable or not of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or whether they are forever destined to depend for their political constitution on accident and force. And what this means is that in the past, most countries are started by a domination of a major force of people that come in and conquer it, or some king or queen conquers it, and that they're established by accident or by force. But to actually have the opportunity to defeat a country and start from scratch, and a group of people get together and say, what kind of form of government do we want to establish? That was a unique situation, a situation that they could actually start from scratch to build a nation. But part of the problem was this understanding of the views, passions, and prejudices little favorable to the discovery of the truth. At that time, each of these territories, which were called colonies, which we'll refer to as states from here on out, just to make it easy to understand, each of these states were governed by governors, many that were attached still to the crown. And they didn't want to give up their power. They had their little fiefdoms, if you will, and to be able to come down and get them all to agree upon a union, uh, a government that they would all be a part of was a difficult thing because each one, like I said, didn't want to give up their own little power. So what Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay were trying to establish, looking at in the Federalist Papers, was the fact that there are 13 colonies and they are, each have their little fiefdoms set up. They didn't want to give up their power, but they saw the need that there needed to be one government, a government all united under some form of government. So how do you do that? So the people that wanted a strong, centralized government, um, that wasn't going to work. The states, the 13, many of the 13 states, especially the southern states, were not going to agree to a strong centralized government. They wanted the states to have the power. And so how do you combine those two ideologies together? And so what they did was they came up with a thing called the Connecticut Compromise, which is a bicameral system. The bicameral system, the House of Representatives does it by vote, by population, and that was more for the more of a centralized understanding of things, where the government would be more powerful. But then they had the Senate, which was by 2 votes per state, which gave power to the states. And that seemed to be, that was a compromise, but to get those states that wanted that to remain, that keep their power, to be able to be a part of this centralized government. And actually, Hamilton in particular saw this. They were willing to compromise to get this government done. They saw the need for there to be a centralized government, but also that they wanted to limit the powers of the government to be of the people, by the people, for the people. And so they decided that it would be best to give some of the power to the states. And so this difference between popular vote for the House of Representatives and the 2 votes per senator per state in the Senate was a good way, actually, for this checks and balances. It's all about checks and balances, the power. You don't want the power to be in these states individually, little fiefdom, but you also didn't want too much power in the federal government. So this was a compromise, and they realized that that was the best, and that's why they were willing to put their names on the Federalist Papers in order to get the ratification of this Constitution. So the situation was they had the Articles of Confederation, which were already in place for these 13 states. So they were trying to determine whether they can rework those and incorporate a centralized government, or should they start from scratch. And it was obviously that they decided it could not be salvaged, so they started from scratch, and that's why they came up with this thing known as the Constitution. And of course, now the emphasis throughout, like John Jay mentions Providence 3 times in his little section of number 2 at the Federalist, throughout the Constitution, especially the Declaration of Independence. These men that were considered the founding fathers prayed before the meetings and after the meetings. They asked for God's guidance upon this country and this people seem to have been made for each other, and it appears as if it was designed of providence. So I just wanted to mention that because I do believe that these men prayed to God and were given extreme, extraordinary wisdom in establishing this country. Then the people that are going to be governing should be making sure that they're doing individually interested in the public liberty and prosperity of the people. So it should be of the people, by the people, and for the people. And those that are governing should have them at their they should be the number one interest, the public. We want to, now that I've set the groundwork with the founding fathers and some of the mindset, which leads into exactly how they set up this government, which all go towards the understanding of the Electoral College. This all fits together, so just bear with me. First, they started off with the legislative branch, which is called the Congress, where the laws are established. Then there's the judiciary, which oversees the interpretation of those laws, with the Supreme Court being the highest court, which focuses on the constitutionality of laws. And then there's the executive branch, which oversees the actual day-to-day operations along with the legislature. But there's these checks and balances, so one doesn't really have all the power over the other, but there's checks and balances between the three. So we looked at the 3 branches of government, but now we're going to look at the 3 branches of operation of this government, also with checks and balances. We have the House of Representatives, which is by population, the Senate, which is 2 votes per state, and then the executive branch, all with checks and balances. And as we have established before, the House of Representatives was by population. The Senate was by 2 votes per state, which gave everybody a voice. And now we come to the mode of electing the president. But there was so much fear that nothing was more to be desired than that every practical obstacle should be opposed to cabal, intrigue, or corruption. They wanted to protect our system of government, especially the voting apparatus, in particular that for the president. So, and they really didn't trust necessarily the people that were in the Congress, the legislatures, and the senators, not to be influenced by those that they are governing, or maybe some um, self-interest groups. That's what we call them today. So that they decide not to have, so no senator or representative or other person holding a place of trust or profit under the United States can be one of the numbers of the electors. So the electors had to be someone other than those that are holding office, which was and to keep undue influence away, and hopefully the representatives, these electors, will be representatives of the people instead of some self-interest group. And then the electors are equal to the number of senators and representatives of each state in the national government. All right, so the House of Representatives was formed by popular vote, and then of course the smaller states complained because they didn't get a voice, because the 3 or 4 largest states would dominate all the elections, and they wanted a voice in the government. So that's when the founding fathers came up with the Senate. And the Senate, the focus was on each having a voice per state, so that gave voice to the small states so they could all be heard. So then when it came to elect for the President of the United States, how do we do this? Well, we know it's not fair by population, because it eliminates the small states and they're having a voice in the government. And it's not fair for it to be 1 vote per state or 2 votes per state as the Senate. because that would give too much power to little Connecticut versus New York. That's not fair either. So the wisdom of the founding fathers was to combine the two. It still gives a weight to the popular vote, but at the same time it gives some, diminishes it some to help out the smaller states so they can be heard. So we end up, it's fixed by law that the House of Representatives has 435 votes, which is one per representative. That's fixed by law for the Electoral College purposes especially. And the 2 votes per state, which is equals to each of the senators. And so those combined to come up with the total amount for the Electoral College. This is by representation to ensure that we don't do it by pure democracy, which is there's a lot of fallacies in that, and we are a republic, not a democracy. I disagree with one point in 1961, the 23rd Amendment, when both the House and the Senate were controlled by the Democrats. They gave votes to D.C. to be able to vote in the presidential election, which translated to 3 votes in the 2016 election. That doesn't seem like much. But when you go from 535 total votes to 538 total votes, it diminishes the effectiveness of the Senate. For instance, there's supposed to be a balance. We're trying to keep a balance between the popular vote and the state votes. And some people say, well, John, that's considered a state. Well, no, it isn't, because if you look at it, it was specifically, they already knew that Washington, D.C. is very liberal. And ever since 1964, yeah, up till now, every election, Washington, D.C. has voted for Democrats. And so it does throw the balance towards the popular vote and towards the 435 versus the 100. So I disagree with that, and I'm surprised that the Supreme Court didn't say something about it. They shouldn't be looking at just the total votes, but the percentage to keep that balance. For those that say that the Constitution is outdated and archaic, let us review the discussion in light of the general election of 2016. The 3 largest cities in the United States in 2016 were New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. Those 3 cities are in the states of New York, California, and Illinois. If we take the popular vote of those 3 states and compare the difference between Clinton and Trump, we get the following. Clinton beat Trump in New York by a total of 1,736,590 votes. In California, she won by 4,269,978 votes. And in Illinois, she won by 944,714. So in those 3 states, Hillary Clinton won by 6,951,282. So that's just the popular vote of those 3 states. Now, Hillary Clinton won the national election by 2,868,691. So even though she had a head start by 7 million, she only won by a little less than 3 million, which means that Donald Trump won the rest of the United States by 4,082,591 votes. So do we want 3 or 4 or 6 of the top cities, biggest cities in the United States to dictate all of our elections, or do we want all of America to be heard? We are not a democracy. We are a republic by representation. So the Electoral College came out to reflect that all of America should be heard, and that was 306 to 232. So I guess the founding fathers' wisdom is still relevant today. We can let the 3 most populated cities dictate an election, or we can continue to follow the wise counsel of our founding fathers, like Hamilton, to ensure that all of America is heard. Now, as you can see through this example of the numbers actually being applied, nothing has changed. We don't want one politician to be able to go to the 6 largest cities in the United States and win the election without even visiting the other parts of the United States. So here's the difference. The Democratic ideology would be every vote should count. That's their mantra. On the other side, the Republican ideology would be all America should be heard. And the founding fathers have a tendency to believe in the more Republican understanding of how this should work through representation, not a direct democracy. So the ideology between the two, the Republican ideology, in this sense, the Electoral College, is more in line with our Constitution. So that's what I'm saying. If you want to get rid of the Electoral College, you're taking away one of the main foundations of what the founding fathers are trying to get across in not being pure democracy, which always fails and will fail, versus a republic by representation. We must make sure that all of America is represented. James Madison, in the Federalist Papers, number 43, he states, in a confederacy founded on Republican principles and composed of Republican members, the superintending government ought clearly to possess authority to defend the system against aristocratic or monarchical innovations. So once again, they want to stay away from being dominated by king or queen or some aristocratic cabal or oligarchy. They wanted to be of the people, by the people, and for the people. And how do we protect that? And one of those ways was through the Electoral College. Some people may ask, well, John, what do you exactly mean by aristocracy? Well, according to Wikipedia, it places the strength in the hands of a small, privileged ruling class, and that is what we want to avoid. Okay, I want to go back and reiterate the fact that this is not a democracy, it is a republic, and the difference is we are, by definition, by representation, and not by just pure democracy by popular vote. And there was a reason for this. This is one of the foundations that I wanted to start off this whole class by establishing the importance of this, um, because freedom they've already established. If you just read the Constitution and read the Federalist Papers and just read some of these thoughts of the founding fathers, they were afraid of pure democracy. It has not worked around the world. They were afraid of it. Just look at the number of times that they talk about the destructive powers of pure democracy in the Federalist Papers. Um, for instance, John Adams to Abigail Adams that wrote a letter in 1775 that said, "But a constitution of government once changed from freedom can never be restored. Liberty once lost is forever." So freedom has to be instilled and it cannot be taken away. And it has a tendency to come back to this understanding that it's of the people, by the people, and for the people. And unfortunately, pure democracies have a tendency to be corrupted by the aristocracy, by the powerful, these cabals, these powers of influence. So the people that established the Electoral College were aware of that. We need to focus on the protection of freedom. I would like to end with the final mindset of our founding fathers. A good example is George Washington, who served 2 terms. At the end of his second term, the people wanted him to serve another term, or maybe even a 4th term, or perhaps to make him a king, but he declined because he wanted to stay with the Constitution. He felt so strongly about this Constitution to limit the powers of the federal government, to limit the powers of the people that were in charge and make sure that the power remained of the people, by the people, and for the people. That was the mantra of our founding fathers, and they lived by it. They swore by it. They put up their wealth, their honor, in order to give the power to us, the people. And it is up to us. We are the only ones that can give them the power. Let us not give them the power. Keep the Electoral College. So here's the main reference material, because most of you probably have access to the Constitution, but the Federalist Papers, which are a commentary on the Constitution. And even though Alexander Hamilton, for instance, was a big government type of guy at the very beginning, he actually came around and agreed with the Constitution and the limiting of the powers of the government. And matter of fact, so much so that he helped to write this commentary to support the ratification of the Constitution. So, in summary, we need to protect the Electoral College because it is the foundation of liberty and freedom as part of our republic established by the founding fathers in our Constitution. I see so many people, or some people, making the point that it was just thrown together. There was nothing else anybody else could agree on. It was just a compromise. It was just no. It was very well thought out. It was instrumental in our understanding. It is a unique way of forming a constitution, forming a bicameral system, and a way to vote in a president of the United States so that both sides of the issue of the state's power versus the federal power, the population versus representation, this is all part of it. And this is a foundation tool for that. So we cannot get rid of the Electoral College. And one final note, I just want to say that this Constitution, it has been said that it is a terrible form of government, but it's the best form of government ever devised by humanity. And I agree with that, but it's also set up as people that believe in God. The only way that we can make this system work is if we have a spiritual foundation, in my opinion. We're going to talk about this. It wasn't perfect. There was a lot of discussion, which I'll talk to about in the next class when I get into race relations on the difficulty of the slavery issue in regards to the Electoral College and some of the setting up, and why they set up the ability to make amendments. So we'll talk about that later. And now you know more of the story. Stay tuned. This is John McCamick with Truth University. Good day.